Chapter 161. Nolan was not planning on making the next move, but he only wanted to go to sleep with her in his arms. Sleep. Sensing the man's even breathing behind her, Maisie relaxed gradually and felt drowsiness taking over her soon. Maisie and Nolan went downstairs together. Stephen had already prepared breakfast personally. He smiled at the sight of Maisie and Nolan's arrival. "You're up, have some breakfast before you head back." Maisie made her way to a seat and sat down in front of the table just in time to see the all-dressed-up Linda coming downstairs with Madame Vanderbilt. "Did both of you sleep well last night?" Maisie humored Madame Vanderbilt's enthusiastic inquiry by saying, we slept well." Madame Vanderbilt cast a look at Linda, who then made her way to Maisie smilingly. "Maisie, may I sit here?" Maisie said, "As you wish." She pulled out the chair and sat right next to Maisie. Linda said in a friendly yet reserved tone, "Maisie, I've only come to the royal capital of Basburg recently, and there are many areas that I'm not familiar with. Grandma told me that you're going to take me to tour around the city and familiarize myself with it. You won't mind doing that, right?" Linda had been counting on Willow before this, but she did not plan to count on her anymore. It was because she knew that she would stand a chance to get close to Nolan as long as she hung around Maisie. A man as elegant and outstanding as Nolan, who was also handsome, was a rare find that even her grandmother approved. As long as she could draw Nolan's attention, she believed that she could seduce Nolan from Maisie with her beauty for sure. Her grandmother had told her that men did not like powerful women, but they preferred women who were gentle, caring, and loving even more. After all, her uncle was such an example. Had he not gotten himself a mistress in the end after abandoning his powerful, capable wife? Hence, she believed that she would be able to serve Nolan properly in view of her personality. Noticing that Maisie was not speaking, Stephen said with a solemn expression, "Your cousin and her fiancé still have matters to attend to. They don't have the time to show you around." Madame Vanderbilt put in a good word for Linda. "How can you not have the time? It's fine to show her around the company too. Linda is Maisie's cousin after all, so what's wrong with her taking her cousin along when she runs errands?" Madame Vanderbilt knew that her granddaughter had feelings for Nolan. She was planning on living off Maisie. But it was very hard for her to exercise control over the idiotic girl Maisie. Only Linda would obey her. She would be very proud if she could turn the relationship between Linda and Nolan into an intimate one. "Oh, I have Linda dating Nolan completely." Maisie sneered but made no attempt to reply as she had seen through Madame Vanderbilt's scheme. No wonder she's so close with her daughter-in-law Layla. Birds of a feather flock together, sure. Maisie smirked and said, "It's only that not everyone is permitted to enter Nolan's company. If you really want to go so badly, I have an opening for a helper in my office. You may come and work as an intern." Nolan's gaze grew colder. "What is this woman doing? What are you saying, Z? How could you make your cousin an intern? Maisie took her sweet time to interrupt Madame Vanderbilt by saying, "She's not young anymore, so it's about time for her to get a job, right? If there's something that one can do to support themselves, why should one laze around and do nothing? After all, you have to gather adequately good capital before you marry a rich man too, right?" Maisie mocked Madame Vanderbilt's teachings in just a few brief remarks. Madame Vanderbilt had the thinking of a feudalist that valued only the male heir. Apart from the poor upbringing of her grandson, she had taught her granddaughter to marry rich. Moreover, was Madame Vanderbilt's act of taking Linda to the royal capital of Basburg not because she wanted to marry Linda to a rich man and secure her finances? Chapter 162. Madame Vanderbilt blushed in embarrassment and almost turned against Maisie right there and then. On the other hand, Linda felt very uneasy in her heart after hearing that. However, she forced herself to agree with Maisie so she could get closer to Nola. "Maisie, I'm really bad at work. I hope that you and your fiancé won't reject me by then." If one were to describe Willow as a hypocrite, Linda was the real temptress. Maisie smiled and said, "I'll be stern." Linda was rendered speechless. Nolan could not help smirking at the sight of Maisie and Linda at loggerheads. It was truly adorable to see his sweet wife determined to scheme against someone. Linda arrived at the Black Gold group as she wished. She could not help feeling excited in her heart upon seeing the bustling company. She did not expect Nolan's company to be so huge. Nolan had truly lived up to his reputation of being an influential, powerful person in the royal capital of Bassburg. Humph. As long as I'm willing to work here, I will certainly make Mr. Goldman notice my presence sooner or later. Linda followed Maisie to the 16th floor. She looked around the place and could not help asking, "Maisie, is your fiancé here?" Maisie said, "He's not here, of course, why? Would you like to meet him?" Linda assumed a piteous expression. "No, please don't misunderstand, I was only asking." Maisie smiled but made no reply. Kennedy walked out of the office and noticed the girl following Maisie. "Maisie, this is my cousin, she's the new intern." Upon saying that, Maisie waved her hand and summoned a female staff member. "Take her to see Director Zaleski so he can make work arrangements for her." The female staff member nodded with a smile. "Sure." She turned around and said to Linda, "Please come with me, miss." After Linda left with the female staff member, Kennedy was stunned for a moment before he asked in a puzzled tone, "Did you assign her to the warehouse? Or else, I didn't hire her to do nothing here. If she's going to intern here, she's going to have to buck up, work hard, and train on her patience." Maisie smiled before turning around and stepping into her office. Kennedy was still pondering. Why did it feel like Maisie was doing it on purpose? In the administrative office, Quincy reported the situation on the 16th floor to Nolan and found him sniggering. He had no idea what caused Nolan's peal of laughter. Quincy was startled and assumed a confused expression. "Are you all right, Mr. Goldman? Why does it feel like Mr. Goldman is in a great mood now that he came to work? Could it be that Mr. Goldman's relationship with Ms. Vanderbilt has already reached a home run? Why should I not be all right?" Nolan took a glance at him. "You seem to be in a good mood." Good mood? Nolan did not deny that. He had not expected that the woman would actually assign her cousin to do manual labor. It seemed that the wild kitten was displeased after overhearing his conversation with Linda last night. His phone that was placed on the table rang. Nolan took a glance at the phone screen and found that it was his father calling. In the 16th floor office, more and more customers were making appointments to purchase customized jewelry after the Soul Jewelry Studio was operating officially. Her jewelry was only customized to order, and her business was new to the market. There was a promotional discount for advanced booking while the jewelry designer was Zora. Maisie had already received more than 20 customers in succession. Maisie walked out of the conference room while chatting joyously with her customer before personally sending the customer to the elevator. She returned to her office to find Nolan leaning against her office chair as soon as she opened the door and looked up. She paused for a moment before she lowered her gaze. "Mr. Goldman is really hard at work by coming to my office." Chapter 163. Maisie smirked. "If you're taking pity on her, I may assign her to you." Nolan lowered his gaze and smiled. He got up, walked toward her, and wrapped an arm around her waist rapidly before taking a few steps forward and pinning her against the door. "What happened to you claiming that you're not jealous?" Maisie looked at him coldly. She could not stand the sight of Linda's feigned act of being weaker than Willow. In addition, was it wrong for her to build up Linda's endurance of hardships? She shoved away his hand. "Don't be holding and hugging me out of nowhere, it's inappropriate if seen by others. It's good for them to see too." As he was speaking, he went for her lips. Maisie was so furious that she bit him. "Will you please behave yourself, Nolan?" Nolan raised his hand and cupped the back of her head. He pressed his lips against her and pushed his tongue to taste her sweetness. He could obviously feel that she was getting used to his kiss. Maisie reached for his arms while he wrapped his arms around her body. There was no telling if it was a trained move. His kissing skill was becoming more proficient than before. Maisie felt as if her entire body was within his control. His lips moved away from hers and traveled south. She felt a gush of fiery heat that was about to engulf her. After feeling the momentary chill, Maisie recovered from her surprise and stopped his restless hand. "You bastard, Nolan." She bent her knee and delivered an attack while he was kneed after being caught off guard. The man let out a deep hiss and gnashed his teeth tightly. He felt weak from the intense pain. "I'm sorry. I was only trying to calm you down." Maisie panicked at the sight of him turning pale ever so slightly. She stepped forward to help him up. Are you all right?" Nolan gnashed his teeth and laughed due to extreme anger. "Are you really trying to make me impotent? It's your fault for suddenly doing that. If I had the intention to force myself on you, you wouldn't stand a chance at resisting." He inhaled a deep breath. All he wanted to do was to have some fun. However, he did go a little too far earlier, and he did not expect that the woman would have such a huge reaction. Did she really dislike being touched by him so badly? Maisie looked down. She knew that she would not be able to avoid it sooner or later, no matter how much she tried to resist and hide regardless. She bit her lip and said, "I need some time, at the very least." Nolan said nonchalantly, "All right, I won't force it on you if you don't consent to it either. Daisy and the others will be joining me to head home tomorrow because my father wants to see them." He left the office upon saying that. Maisie made her way to her office desk and slumped down weakly. She was clueless about Nolan's feelings for her and had no idea what her apprehension was either. Her mind was a chaotic mess. Could it be that she was becoming indecisive after her prolonged stay in her comfort zone in exchange for dragging Nolan on? She figured that he should be angry at her for her treatment earlier. That would be good for her too. Maisie could not help clenching her fists. Before the Vanderbilts' affair could be resolved and before she could take back her mother's company, she could not allow herself to be immersed in his affection. Willow had spent the night out yesterday and found out from her mother's complaint upon her return that the bitch Maisie had been home with Nolan and had spent the night there. She bit her nails in anger. Yet she counted herself lucky that she had not been home last night. She feared that the bitch Maisie would bring up her mother's issue now. Willow could not allow the Vanderbilts to know about the issue. Willie. Linda seems to have a crush on Nola. Layla could see the way Linda had been looking at Nolan last night. Linda had been behaving like a maiden who fell in love for the first time. Willow's expression turned displeased upon hearing that. Linda, does she think that she's qualified for him? Chapter 164. Naturally, Layla knew that her daughter was still hung up on Nolan, so she hastily said, "Don't mind Nolan for now. Do you think you still need to concern yourself with Nolan not being attracted to you when you're the heiress of the de Amas?" At the mention of this, Willow held her mother's hand and said, "You're right, Mom, we must make the Lucas family fully believe that I'm Marina's daughter. However, I'll still need to get my hands on the bitch's hair so I can use it for the DNA test." Layla sneered. "That's easy. The silly girl Linda is working in black gold now. We shall send her to handle this task so the little bitch Maisie won't suspect us." Linda, who had never engaged in manual labor work, was angry and agreed after being assigned as an intern in the warehouse. Damn it. Maisie must have done this on purpose. On the other hand, it was at this time that she received her Aunt Layla's call, so she began complaining to Layla without the slightest hesitation. Layla comforted her insincerely and said, "All right, calm down, Linda. There's nothing wrong with enduring some hardships for the opportunity to work there. In addition, you'll be able to meet Nola frequently if you choose to continue working there." Layla mentioned that on purpose. Linda actually chose to endure it for Nolan. "You're right, Auntie Layla. I will certainly perform well at work then." She thought about how she would certainly tell Nolan about how Maisie bullied her the next time she met Nolan. Nolan would surely take pity on her. Linda, however, had no idea that Layla was mocking her in secret. The silly girl is truly delusional. Why would Nolan fall for a clueless, idiotic wild brat like her? Still, it was a good thing too. Linda's foolishness was the way to deal with Maisie on behalf of Layla and her daughter. Linda actually accepted the request to help willingly after being cajoled by Layla because of her foolishness. It was as easy as breathing for her to get her hands on one strand of Maisie's hair. Kennedy passed the document in his hand to Maisie. The bookings placed this week have surpassed our initial planning. If things progress at this speed, it is estimated that Seoul will be growing immensely in less than a year. Thus, we should take back Vena jewelry in less than a year. Maisie shut the file, raised her head, and smiled. This area was suited to be used as a studio. However, she would need to expand the scale of her studio if her jewelry could make it to the top of the jewelry profession. Rather than spending a large sum of money to purchase other workspaces, she would merge Vena with Seoul instead. Vena Jewelry was not only the company founded by her mother, its location was set in an area known as the commercial Golden Triangle, with a steady stream of people. Moreover, Vena had its own storefront, so she would be able to save on quite a lot of cost indeed. Kennedy could not help chuckling at how Maisie was so calculative in the finances. The money we made from auctioning the Peacock's Pride is enough for you to buy a few stories of workspace in a commercial Golden Triangle. That's not how we're supposed to spend money. She could not bear to do that. Moreover, there were 3 more mouths for her to feed at home. Kennedy said, I'm afraid that the other members of the Vanderbilts may not compromise even if your father is willing to hand over Vena to you. I know. Madame Vanderbilt is here in the city to get her hands on Vena, and there's Layla too. Speaking of which, Layla is still looking into bearing a male heir for my father. I bet she's doing it to ensure her status in the Vanderbilts. Linda arrived at the door and was about to knock when she heard the conversation coincidentally. She pressed her ear against the door. A man's voice was heard saying, Layla is trying to bear a male heir? Chapter 165. Maisie said, if she bears another male heir for real, perhaps her status in the Vanderbilts will be different in the case of Madame Vanderbilt being pleased and loving the grandson. Aunt Layla is trying to bear a male heir? Linda expressed her astonishment. She was aware of her grandmother valuing grandsons more than granddaughters all the while. Her deadbeat younger brother had always been highly regarded more than her in Karelia. She was compelled to take on the chores at home despite her young age, while her brother needed not to do anything. Her grandmother had only treated her a little better only when she was about the age to Wednesday. Her grandmother was counting on her to marry into a rich family so she could support her younger brother financially. However, Madame Vanderbilt had no idea that she wanted to marry the rich not because she wanted to support her brother financially, but because she wanted to cut loose from being ordered around by her brother. If her aunt were to bear a male heir, perhaps her grandmother's focus would not be placed on her brother solely anymore. At the thought of this, Linda yearned for that in her heart to a certain extent. The office door opened all of a sudden and Linda fell to the floor next to Kennedy's feet because she was eavesdropping through the door. Kennedy furrowed his brows as he looked at her. Maisie naturally noticed Linda and looked up. Why are you standing outside the door? Linda got up with an embarrassed look on her face. Maisie, I'm here to see you. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to eavesdrop on purpose. Linda was about to burst into tears. Kennedy looked at Maisie. Maisie nodded, permitting him to leave. Maisie placed down the document. How can I help you? I would like to inquire from you because there are many things that I'm not well aware of on my first day of internship. Maisie, you won't think I'm troubling you, right? Asked Linda cautiously. Even though Maisie was not a fan of the Vanderbilts, she knew that Linda was only behaving in this matter because of Madame Vanderbilt's brainwashing. Compared to Willow, Linda did not disgust her other than just being a little pretentious. Most importantly, Linda had yet to do anything to hurt her. Maisie stood up and walked to Linda slowly. Why would I think that? You may seek my guidance if there's anything you don't understand. Of course, you may also seek guidance from Director Zaleski or the other staff members. Thank you, Maisie. I have one more question to ask you, Maisie. Go ahead. Do you hate me very much? Asked Linda weakly. Maisie humored her by saying, no. Linda looked up to see her, smiling sweetly. That's great. Before Maisie could understand her intention, Linda suddenly hugged Maisie. Maisie, I really do want to learn from you. I know that I'm a fool, but I hope that you won't mind me. The family members in my hometown disliked me because I'm a girl, and I'm very scared of being hated. While Linda was speaking, she conveniently pulled a hair from Maisie and held it in her hand. Maisie did not speak. Linda let go of her and took a step back with her head lowered. I'm sorry, Maisie, I have no choice but to obey my grandmother because I want her to take me seriously. However, I'm glad to know that you don't hate me. She smiled and said, I shall head back to work now. Maisie felt rather puzzled as she gazed after Linda's departing silhouette. Could it be that she regarded all the Vanderbilt family members as the same and did not favor them because of her dislike for the Vanderbilts? Could it be that Linda was different from the rest of them? Was it her fault for being narrow-minded? At the Lucas family, Louis arrived at the study room. He was aware of his mother, Larissa, meeting him for Willow's matter. He had his hands in his pockets as he leaned against the wall, expressionless. Do you really think that Willow is a cousin of mine? Chapter 166. She's willing to get a DNA test. Larissa turned to look at him. When the results come out, you'll have to accept it no matter what. Louis shrugged. Ever since Willow had yelled at the two children in the Michelin restaurant and had thrown coffee at someone, he never had a good feeling about her. He had heard his mother talk about his aunt, Marina. Given Marina's upbringing, her child wouldn't be so uncivilized. But if it was, as his mother said, when the DNA results came out, and they confirmed it, she would be his cousin. Even though he still wouldn't like her. What did you find out about the designer Zora? Louis's eyes darted. Yes, she's a luxury jewelry designer named Maisie Vanderbilt. She has something going on with Mr. Goldman. Larissa's eyes darkened. It's her? Willow had told her that she had a stepsister called Maisie, who had worked with Miss Santiago to frame her. So she was the one behind all the drama online, and she was Nolan Goldman's woman? Larissa was deep in thought, and her expression changed. Even the Goldmans wouldn't be able to bully the D'Arma. The children got up early to get ready because they were visiting their grandfather at the Goldman family estate. They were elated. Colton even contacted the school for 2 days of absence. Nolan carried Daisy to the car while Waylon walked behind Quincy, carrying Daisy's and his bags. Nolan left Daisy in the back seat and turned to see Maisie and Colton walking over. Colton was doing a little jog. He had never visited the family estate before. Only Daisy and Waylon had been there the previous time. Seeing her walking slowly, Colton rushed her. Mommy, hurry. Maisie didn't want to go, but she couldn't just leave them since the children wanted to. Colton climbed into the first car to sit with Waylon and Daisy. The three stuck their heads out and giggled. Mommy, go sit in the other one with Daddy. Maisie was rendered speechless. She got in the car, put on her sunglasses, and stuck both her hands into her coat pockets. Nolan, who was sitting next to her, didn't say a word. He hadn't been speaking a lot since the night before, reverting to his solemn self. Maisie looked out the window. She was suddenly not used to this and felt uneasy. But wasn't a relationship like that quite nice? They were just there for the children and would not interfere with each other's lives. After a year, she would be able to. Upon recalling how comfortable the children were with Nolan now, she was hesitant. When they got to the estate, the car parked outside the doors. And the butler came to welcome them. Hello, Mr. Cheshire, Daisy and Waylon said politely. The old butler laughed and was going to say something when he saw Nolan walk over with a woman and another child. He paused, took another look at Waylon and Daisy, and realized that they were triplets. Young Master Goldman. Mr. Cheshire nodded at Nolan. Nolan nodded back and brought the children in. Maisie walked into the mansion with hands still in her pockets, surprised because she thought she had just walked into a different world. The scale of this mansion, the antique architecture, this was how the rich of Basburg lived. Mr. Goldman Sr. stood at the grand hall, waiting for his 3 grandchildren. Seeing them happily running toward him, he bent down with arms wide open to welcome them. "Oh there. Look at my grandchildren." Chapter 167. "Grandpa, did you miss us?" Daisy beamed. "Of course, I missed you to bits." Mr. Goldman Sr. tapped the tip of her nose, his eyes overflowing with love. It was the first time Colton was there, so everything was new to him. "Grandpa, this place is so beautiful." Mr. Goldman Sr. laughed heartily. "Haha, this is your home too." The maid guided Maisie to her room. The room had modern decor, but the view there was mesmerizing, and it was quiet. They could see a man-made pond and the woods. Her phone rang. It was Stephen. She walked to the window, hesitantly putting the phone to her ear. "Dad?" "Maisie, I was going through the items left by your mom recently. I'll pass them to you when you have time to come over." Mom's items? She had always been under the impression that her father had not kept anything she left. Maisie pressed her lips together, and her voice was a little hoarse. "Okay." The moment the call cut off, Maisie held her phone to her chest and turned around to leave, but she saw Nolan standing downstairs. A woman was standing in front of him. Who was that? The short-haired woman standing with Nolan was laughing, but unlike the day when he had been speaking to Linda, Nolan smiled at her. Upon seeing them enjoying their time together, Maisie's heart was uncomfortable. She really shouldn't have believed him. The woman noticed her and waved at her when Maisie's mind started to wander, smiling. When Nolan looked up, Maisie panicked, turned around, and left. Nolan caught a glimpse and pressed his lips together. "Mr. Goldman Sr. said you brought your lover back." "So it's true." The short-haired woman excitedly slapped Nolan's arm. "Sherry Lawson." Quincy rushed over and pulled her aside. "Don't get physical, I'm not going to save you if you make Maisie angry." Sherry scratched her head. "I'm not getting physical. Everyone in the troops does that." Quincy rolled his eyes. It was true, his sister, who was in the troops, didn't care. She was used to being around men so much, this was the norm. If she were to marry one day, she wouldn't get a husband but a new buddy instead. Maisie was different, though. They turned around but realized that Nolan was gone. Maisie went downstairs and walked past the study, where she heard the 3 Rugrats laughing with their grandfather. Mr. Goldman Sr. seemed to be telling them a story. She realized that the children loved the Goldman, and Mr. Goldman Sr. loved them so much. If she insisted on leaving a year later, it would be too cruel for them. But if she had to accept Nolan, Maisie turned and bumped into someone. It was Nolan. He was wearing a thin knitted sweater, looking comfortable at home. But he was still able to look great even just wearing that. That was why he had luck with women no matter where he went. "You saw?" "Saw what?" Maisie realized what he meant halfway through her answer. Did he mean seeing him speaking to the woman? Chapter 168. Even if I did see, is that something I should be surprised about? Maisie shrugged and smiled. Nolan squinted and walked past her. "I guess you wouldn't mind." So there was no point explaining. Maisie was rooted on the spot. After Nolan said that, she felt a prick in her heart. It was very uncomfortable. She held her first. Yes, she didn't mind. There shouldn't be anything going on between them. She didn't know that the 3 kids had seen everything. Their parents' relationship was on red alert. Mr. Goldman Sr. stood behind the three of them, lightly patting their heads. After Maisie walked away, the three said, "Grandpa, what should we do if Mommy won't accept Daddy?" Mr. Goldman Sr. understood what was happening. Then the problem would be your mother. Why wouldn't she accept him? It's probably because she is uncertain. She was still uncertain whether Nolan was the person she could rely on, so she was feeling really insecure about love, marriage, and building a family. He didn't know what the girl had gone through. "I saw Daddy speaking to a woman today. Do you think Mommy saw it and thought that Daddy was fooling around?" Waylon's words stunned Mr. Goldman Sr., but he suddenly smiled. "Probably, but don't worry, Aunt Sherry wouldn't be interested in a man like your daddy." Mr. Goldman Sr. probably knew her very well to say that. He had been running a business for so many years, so he had had enough experience to know. The three Lawsons had grown up among the troops and known Nolan since they were children. They were all good at different things. Hans was impulsive but brave and loyal. Elder Master Goldman trusted him dearly. Quincy was detail-oriented and could get anything done well. That was why Nolan had chosen him to work in Black Gold. Sherry, the youngest, was brave, straightforward, and carefree. Even Elder Master Goldman couldn't hold her back, let alone Nolan, so she stayed in the troops. The three Rugrats were surprised. There were women who were not interested in their father. "I have an idea." The two others and Mr. Goldman Sr. looked at Waylon after he said that. He put one hand below his chin and continued. "If this works, Mommy will believe that Daddy is serious about her." Seeing him acting like an adult, Mr. Goldman Sr. narrowed his eyes. "What idea would a little kid have?" Waylon said, "But the plan might hurt Daddy." The next day, Maisie hadn't slept well. She walked downstairs tired and saw the maid serving breakfast to Mr. Goldman Sr., Daisy, and Colton. "I'm sorry I slept in." Sleeping in at someone else's home and only getting up during mealtime was rude, and Maisie knew it. Mr. Goldman Sr. was an understanding man. "It's all right, you're just not used to being here. It's normal not to sleep well. Sit down and have breakfast with us." Maisie pulled out the chair and sat down, but Nolan and Waylon weren't there. "Where's Waylon?" "Mommy. He went out with Daddy and Aunt Sherry early this morning." When Colton mentioned Sherry, Maisie's expression slightly changed. Daisy looked at Mr. Goldman Sr. Mr. Goldman Sr. smiled and said, "Maisie, don't worry about Nolan. Sherry is Quincy's sister, and they have an older brother, Hans. The three of them have been with Nolan since they were children and were part of the troops." Chapter 169. Maisie paused but smiled awkwardly. "I wasn't worried. I was just telling you, Sherry isn't interested in Nolan. You'll like her once you get to know her." Colton said, "Yes, Mommy, Aunt Sherry is very nice. She's just a little loud and a little rough around the edges." Maisie just smiled. If she said anything more, it would show that she was jealous. She wasn't going to be jealous because of Nolan. She would only be jealous because another woman had already bought over the three Rugrats. Daisy went close to Colton and whispered, "Do you think Mommy looks angry?" Colton nodded in agreement. Sherry came staggering in and yelled loudly, "Oh no, no." She walked in huffing, resting on the door. Mr. Goldman Sr. stood up. "What's going on? Aren't you out with Nolan and Waylon?" Sherry waved her hand and said, "Waylon said that he wanted to buy some toys for his siblings, so we went to the market, but Waylon went missing. I split up with Nolan to search, but now I can't find either of them." Maisie shot up and looked at her in shock. "Waylon is missing?" Sherry stumbled toward her and almost kneeled. "I'm sorry, it was my fault." Mr. Goldman Sr. coughed and said in a serious tone, "All right, send someone out to search for them. The town isn't big. But the area isn't extensively monitored, so it would be tougher to search than if it was in the city." "Sir, I'll go immediately. If I can't find them, you can take my legs away." Sherry honestly felt that she was in trouble, so she ran out immediately. Maisie held her fists. Waylon. She left without much thought and without having her breakfast. Colton and Daisy knew their brother's plan, but their father and Aunt Sherry didn't, and neither did their mother. Alright, don't worry, if Waylon came up with that plan, coupled with Grandpa's help, he wouldn't actually go missing. After saying that, Mr. Goldman Sr.'s face sank. He didn't expect the 5-year-old Waylon to come up with such a dangerous plan. Although it was a risky plan, the way this kid worked was exactly like Nolan's grandfather. He was a lot more like Titus Goldman than Nolan when it came to ferocity. He really was a Goldman. Maisie and Sherry searched the marketplace. She followed Sherry's instructions and split up. She asked a store owner who remembered Sherry, and based on her description, he had seen Nolan and Waylon too, but he hadn't noticed where they went. Maisie lost her cool. She couldn't imagine what would happen if a little boy like Waylon went missing. It was her fault. She shouldn't have overslept. What would she do if Waylon disappeared? He was a huge part of her heart. Don't be anxious for now, I've asked my brother to come over, we'll find them. Sherry was busy making phone calls while consoling her. Maisie knew she couldn't blame anyone but herself. Chapter 170. Nolan's phone. Maisie almost forgot about that. She picked up her phone and called him, but it didn't go through. Waylon was probably wearing his phone watch. She dialed his number, but it didn't go through either. She was losing it. Had something happened to them? My brother is here. Right after Sherry said that, Quincy and some bodyguards appeared. What happened to Mr. Goldman and Waylon? I'm sorry, it was my fault for not keeping an eye on them. Waylon suddenly disappeared, and I split up with Mr. Goldman to search. But I ended up losing them both. That was the first time Sherry had met a setback like that. She was very familiar with every Comer of the town, but she had lost a child who was under her nose. That was a huge disgrace. Mr. Goldman probably went to find Waylon. Could they be in the wild? If Waylon was kidnapped, those people wouldn't hang around a crowd. They would surely go somewhere remote. What are we waiting for then? Go now. Sherry didn't wait for Quincy's command and started running. If she couldn't find them, she was going to lose her legs. At the outskirts, Waylon ran into the woods and peeked from behind a tree. He knew that the people his grandfather had sent out were following him, so he wasn't worried about his own safety. Even though he felt bad for making his father sad. That was the only way to know if his mother cared about his father. Waylon. Waylon went back behind the tree and kept quiet when he heard Nolan's voice. Nolan was there because he had seen a few suspicious-looking people going toward there, so he had to check. Who were they? If something really happened to Waylon, he was going to end them. When Waylon was going to let them ambush him, he heard a sound that made him freeze. He slowly turned around. A snake suddenly popped up among the grass a few feet away. He slowly backed up. But the snake straightened its neck, ready to attack. Ouch! Waylon squared his jaw. He tripped on a vine while trying to run. He turned his head and saw the snake lunge at him. When he grabbed a branch on the ground, a body flashed in front of him, and the snake bit his arm. Nolan held the snake and threw it into the trees. He pulled out a knife and stabbed the snake, which stopped moving after a few jolts. Daddy, Waylon looked at him in shock while still sitting on the ground. When he got up, his legs were weak because he was too afraid. He lost his balance and started rolling down the hill, but he didn't feel any pain. He realized that his father was hugging him when he opened his eyes. Nolan had Waylon in his arms. His head had hit a tree, and the snake bite on his arm started bleeding. He was cut by the vines all over. And his white shirt was torn. He tried to stay awake and looked at Waylon, who was safe, and managed to squeeze out a smile. It's good that you're all right. Daddy. Mr. Goldman, Waylon. At the hospital in the town, when Maisie got the call from Quincy, she hurriedly went to see Waylon, who was sitting on a bench. He sat there looking disheveled, with dirty clothes and dirt on his face.